Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Monday, August 11th, 2025, episode 461. Make matchmaking great again. I should have a Make Something Great Again series, but anyway, today I got a visit from one of my college roommates, and it took 38 years for us to meet up again. And it was only because he was driving through the area, going from the West Coast to the East Coast for family issues, that we were able to cross paths, and that only for about an hour or two. So it was a pretty cool trip down memory lane, and part of the time we wondered why it's so hard to talk to some people, particularly um, of different political ideologies, and even people that we were pretty close to from back in the day. And then another topic that had come up was how we met our wives. And I think I've shared snippets of it before for how I met my wife. But I was thinking, so then I started thinking about the whole process of getting married. I had mentioned before that I was going to do an episode on marriage, and realized that I didn't really want to. So I'm just going to do some random thoughts on marriage that didn't really actually require any kind of research, but just basically some off the cuff, something to think about kind of thing. To give you an idea of the broad range of ideas that I'm familiar with. In other words, I'm not going to say, oh, I don't know anything about this, or I didn't talk about that. No, it's just, it's just some thoughts. Okay. But my uncle didn't meet his wife until the day of the wedding. And so my father's family was somewhat prominent. I guess there used to be some money attached to the family, but he sort of disavowed, walked away from a lot of that when he converted to Christianity. And so as a result, we basically the family didn't, lost all that connection with wealth. But he still was a very well-known figure because he just kind of planted churches everywhere he went. And so he was kind of well known as a respected individual, an honest individual. And so my uncle, his son, their marriage was sort of set up because that's just the way it was done. My father was about, I guess, almost 20 years younger than his older brother. I think he was about 13 or 14. Well, yeah, now that I think about it, right, he got married around 19 and my father was about 6. So they were about 13 years apart. And so that's how he was able to remember some of the things from his brother's marriage, wedding, etc. But my father, so when it was his turn to, like, he was coming of age, he was about 20 years old or so. And so my grandfather, who I never met, he had passed away long before I was even born, but he tried to set up my father, and he protested. I won't go into how, but it was a very controversial way of how he protested. And because of who he was and all of the things that he had already accomplished in his life, um, my grandfather just allowed him to make that choice for himself, that he was not going to be set up. His marriage was not going to be arranged, but that he was going to find another way of finding a wife. And I think part of it, part of the reason was because of what happened to his older brother, and just the difficulties that he saw as a child, looking at his older brother and say, that's not the way I'm going to do it, right? So for myself, so when it came to my turn, I guess my parents used all of their experience, also tradition, culture, all of this other kind of stuff to influence how they were going to somehow get me married. All right, so as it turns out, as you know, after they started this process of introducing me to eligible women, I found out that even before that, and it started when I was around 20, I think around 27 years old, 26, 27 years old, just before I was going to go to Korea and spend a length of time over there. And so before I went, because I think my parents were worried that I would go to Korea and come back married without any input from them. So they tried to attempt to get me married off or at least engaged before I left. And for me, I didn't care. I was like, oh, okay, this is just an opportunity to meet a really cool person. So why not? Why would I say no to that, right? And here's another added bonus. When you are set up in this way, particularly by your parents, you don't have to worry about this approval process. You don't have to worry about your parents not liking your wife because they're the ones who pick this person for you, right? And so that part of the process is completely taken care of. Now, I know, I realize that in America today, most people don't care what their parents think. It's like, well, deal with it. This is my spouse. But, you know, Asian society, at least traditional Asian society, of which I am sort of semi-attached to, that's a big deal. So, and I didn't want, and because our family is really, really close, I didn't want a situation where my family just could not easily hang out with my parents, right? I didn't want that kind of obstacle. So, and it turns out, so when they started this process with me, that pretty much ever since I was a young boy, families would come up to try to set something up between their family, right? Because they had a daughter and with my parents, right? They wanted to try to set something up like, okay, one day we're going to do something together and maybe have them meet each other casually and then perhaps, you know, you know, get to know each other and be put in that situation where they might decide to take it further. Okay. So that was kind of the process. It was a very informal matchmaking process. And I actually did it quite a few times. I had it stuck in my head. I think I counted once, it might have been 25 times that I was introduced to people. And it turns out that I didn't marry any of them. So, but all of them were very, very cool, very, very exceptional women who probably would never have given me the time of day, who never would have even agreed to go out on a date with me if I was the one who had to ask them out, right? But it's because your parents set it up, right? You're obligated to go on the date. And when I say date, in case you were wondering, the way the matchmaking, informal and formal, the way it works, because you have veto power, right? So it wasn't like, okay, well, this is the one I decided you're going to marry, and so now you have to, the wedding's next week, right? It's not like that. Rather, you have veto power. You can say, no, I'm not interested, right? And so that's how I was able to go through 25 opportunities to meet, get to know someone and have a chance to say, well, yeah, we're going to pursue this, right? So the way it usually goes down is the two families come together at a restaurant, you know, the cheaper the better. There's a lot of people. Anyway, so the families get together. Usually it's my parents there and her parents, me and the young lady. And then once we sort of have a short lunch, you know, hamburgers or whatever, then I would take her and we would go somewhere, you know, drive or just walk. And we had a half hour, 30 minutes to an hour just to have a conversation, right? And at the conclusion of the half hour or an hour, you know, you tell the families, okay, we're going to have a second date or we're going to go further. And the reason for doing that is you don't want emotion to be part of the process. And, you know, now that I'm talking about it, all this other stuff is coming out, I'm remembering. You want to make your decision not with emotion, but with a clear head. And some of you are either angry or you get it. You're nodding your head because once you cross that emotion plane, right? When you become crazy about that person, you can't listen to reason any longer. You miss all of the danger signs, which might be telling you, no, 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 stop, don't go any further. This is really going to end badly. Because once you cross that emotion plane, all rational thought just goes out the window, no matter how much someone will try to plead with you, beg with you that this person is a beater, this person is abusive, this person is a liar, they'll cheat on you, whatever. You're not going to listen. All right. And so you want to make that decision to explore, right, before emotion becomes a problem. And obviously, physical attraction is part of it, right? Like, okay, am I attracted to this person or not? So everything, yes, it's on board. You can say no, you can veto for any reason, but you can generally try to, if there is a chance, then you say, oh, yeah, yeah, let's have a second date, right? Um, and then, but of course, if you say no, it's no. And both people have to say yes. So I could say yes, but if she said no, then it's not going to happen. And trust me when I say, usually the very first thing that we talk about once we go off on our own is we acknowledge the fact that well, or at least I bring it up. And I said, were you forced to do this, or are you doing it just to satisfy your parents, or what's really going on, or are you really down with this? And I think 80% of the time, uh, they weren't really into it, which was fine by me. I get it. I grew up in America. I was born in America, and so I understand how weird it may be. So I said, okay, let's just, fulfill our obligatory 30 minutes, hour, and then we'll go back and we'll say it's not going to go. Right. And so I try to keep it really casual that way. And but it was great. I got to meet some really, really interesting people. Obviously, they don't remember who I am. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It was just kind of a cool situation. Um, Particularly since I wasn't allowed to date when I was younger. I wasn't allowed to, but I did. And so this was sort of sanctioned dating. So it was pretty cool for me that way. Ultimately, I did marry someone who I met on the phone. So that was like completely out of left field, and no one could have seen that coming. Anyway, so now today we don't have matchmaking, and people poo-poo the idea of matchmaking. Like when I would bring it up in the university to the students that I would teach, they all were like, oh, how could you do that? Oh, it was sort of groaning, a lot of like, wow, you were that desperate, that kind of thing. But the challenge though is to meet someone who is compatible with you, someone who shares a similar background, similar beliefs. And so it increases the odds and the probability that you're going to get along with each other. Well, how is that any different from an algorithm like eHarmony or whatever it is that's out there? What is it? I don't know. Are they, it's kind of hard to tell if they're a marriage app, dating app, or a hookup app, right? But I think that ultimately the goal is the same. You want to meet someone who you can have a long-term, maybe not, maybe some of these are just hook. I don't know. They all came after me. But in the back of my head, I'm thinking if you connect though, if you click with someone, then it could go somewhere from that, right? So all of these like eHarmony, sites like that, they're built on an algorithm, right? So based on the information that's put in, they calculate values and whatnot, and they try to figure out and calculate who you would most likely, line up with. And so they kind of suggest matches for you, right? So, okay, but it's not that different from being set up by your parents, right? So like what's the deal? You're willing to let an al trust an algorithm with this process, but not your parents, parents who know you and then know also the go-between, the matchmaker, right? You know their family. And so that seems to be a much more reliable way of doing it, especially because on these websites, it seems very easy to lie, right? And so I've seen memes where people misrepresent what they look like, misrepresent, the way people lie on their resume, people are lying on their profiles, so I don't know. There must be something more to it, but I think because it seems discreet and more secret, and so you don't have to tell other people, but your profile is online, man. Everyone can see it. So I don't know. It's just interesting, right? So, but in my mind, the algorithm is not really, it has a broader reach, but is not unlike being set up by your parents. Now, back in the day when I would try to meet women, I would go to another church's Bible study, right? Because the assumption then is, okay, they're Christians and they're single. So I'm single, I'm Christian. So let's see if anyone would be interested. But I think it became kind of a meat market, if you understand that expression, where people are just shopping for a spouse or a date. And I guess there must have been some bad experiences, bad stories, and I think if you let your imagination run, you can figure out probably how things started going sideways. Like you had fakers meeting other fakers, people pretending to be Christians, hooking up with other people who are pretending to be Christians, and it's like, is it a Bible study anymore, or is it just simply, a sort of thinly veiled meat market, a hookup kind of thing, right? And so nowadays, and the only reason why I'm saying that is because there are certain Bible studies that, my kids were trying to go to, but there were restrictions on attendance, which I thought was really funny, but I won't go into why that's kind of interesting. But so these days, it seems that people are less serious about marriage and family, right? The birth rates are falling, divorce rates are, you know, I don't know if they've plateaued, but they're pretty high. And I'm just thinking of Korea right now, where the birth rate is the lowest in the world right now, which is pretty crazy. And people don't want to settle down. They don't want to have a family. They don't want to get married. Like I've even heard that people have they go through the whole marriage process, but they in the back pocket, they don't file the marriage papers. And so they don't have to go through the process of annulment or trying to get the marriage undone, right? And so they kind of go through the motions. And then after a week or so, they say, yeah, this is not happening, right? Which is weird, right? So you got these families that are shelling out all this money, friends that are giving out all these gifts. And then you say, yeah, yeah, we're not married anymore. And we were never married because we never filed the paperwork. So it's kind of an interesting situation going on over in Korea, and people just want to have a good time, right? More and more people in Korea are enjoying more of the Western lifestyle, right? Whereas before, even 20 years ago, there were a lot of poor people. And so now that there's all this wealth, all this liquidity sloshing around, because they have an easy money policy over there as well. And so there's so much money sloshing around that fewer and fewer people are taking marriage seriously. I was thinking it might also be not just simply that people are looking for a good time, but it might also be the Marxist influence because there is a lot of Marxism over there, socialism, socialistic ideas over there, and they are generally anti-family, right? So relationships are simply capitalist, a way for capitalists to exploit relationships, right? So it's a very weird. I went into it in the my episodes on the Communist Manifesto, but yeah, they're not very family friendly, which might explain a lot of things that are going on here in the United States, where a lot of policies have the result of breaking up families, and no one's thinking about undoing them, right? Because that was the actual goal of that legislation is to break up the family. Uh, so, with all of these things going on today, people not interested in getting married, people faking their resume, their bios. So why not then, use people that you trust to introduce you to people who might be a good fit for you? But then, of course, at the same time, there's a breakdown in family relationships between parents and children. So that makes it even more difficult. Like, do you trust your parents' judgment? Do you trust your children's judgment? All of these other factors. And so thinking about marriage made me remember this article, which was taken down. I'm not sure why. I probably should have reached out to the author, and I thought maybe it was because he was writing a book on this idea. And so then he decided to take, which is weird, right? Because usually you have the paper, which serves as a primer for the book. But anyway, and I forget even what it was called, but it was called it had something to do with the cost of sex, right? So even in the United States 40, 50 years ago, to have sex required marriage. Now, to get married, right? So, particularly on the woman's part, you might want to call sexist, whatever, but this over time, and I've talked about this when I talked about culture, these values and this understanding came about for a reason. Okay. So women had to be really, really picky, right? Because they wanted to maintain their virtue. And so they were very picky as to who they were going to marry. And so you already have this built-in system like, okay, the reason why people want to marry you is because they want to have sex. So then who do you choose, right? The competition among the suitors, the bachelors, the men who come to court you, well, okay, well, who is going to be best capable of supporting me, of supporting the family, of providing for the family? And this is more of a traditional mindset, right? And so basically, a guy had to prove that he was capable of supporting and being financially able and capable of supporting a family. So financial security, very, very high, number one, top of the list requirement. And this forced men to have to, boys, to be serious about uh, being successful in life. Right, it forced them because if you're a bum, I mean, who's going to marry a bum, right? So you had to be successful. You had to work hard. You had to study hard. You had to have a job. You had to be stable, all this stuff, right? And then you might become eligible to be married. Then came the 1960s, the sexual revolution, feminism, all this other kind of stuff, right? And so whether it was because of the birth control pill or inflation or feminism, whatever, and I've seen theories on all of them. I think it was probably a mixture of all of them. Women started to work. And if women started to work, then, especially in the courtship period, the ability of a man to support the family, that becomes less of a requirement. And almost overnight, then, sex became really cheap, right? Because you didn't have to have a career on tap or on the verge of a career or already have a career to make you eligible for marriage and therefore sex. You just had to look good, right? And so now physical appearance became a big top criteria for sex, not financial stability, right? And so, I think it was a mixture of all these different things. And so marriage age started getting delayed, right? So people started getting married later. Birth rate started to decline. And I'm sure there are various theories as to why this happens, and usually happens in a more prosperous society. But I think it's a mixture of reasons. It's not just one. Um, so now people are focused more on looking good, right? As opposed to actually being someone that other people can be with for the rest of their lives, right? And so, particularly men, just all about looking good, which meant that their sense of responsibility of getting their life in order and following a career, that is pushed back even more. Because most men, if you give them an option to lounge around all the time, watch football or watch sports and play games, they will do it, okay? Unless you give them another incentive. And so then they get off their butts and start being more responsible. But because the price of sex has come down so much, why bother, right? Until it becomes really, really necessary. And then you see a lot of guys in their mid to upper 20s now trying to get more serious about life. So it seems that for a combination of reasons, people are less interested in marriage and therefore less interested in the process of trying to find someone to marry. It's more about the hookup. It's more about the one night stands or the two ships in the night kind of relationship, right? But even after marriage, you don't have as many stable marriages, right? It becomes sort of a kind of a an oddity to be married for a really long time, which then turns into fewer male role models for lots of younger kids, right? And I see this in a lot of schools as well, because usually it's the mom that gets custody, which basically means there's no father in the picture, or if there is a male figure, it's not their biological father. And this leads to a lot more dysfunction in society. So, I started out talking about dating or meeting someone for marriage, and now we're talking about perhaps one possible explanation for a lot of the social dysfunction in society. So basically, I was just brainstorming, talking out loud, thinking out loud, talking out loud. What am I saying? Thinking out loud. And maybe, someone who's listening hears it and has an idea and wants to write a master's thesis on it or write a paper on it. That would be kind of interesting. But anyway, shooting from the hip, as it were. And that's it for this episode. We'll talk to you next time.